The Data Collectors. Written by Danielle Palli. Narrated by Graham Mack and Danielle Palli. 19. New Moon Celebration. Sunday evening, 5 years after the assembly. Tanager was already waiting for Lucene when she climbed out of the window. He was wearing his usual fedora and long jacket, even though it was at least 85 degrees out. The sun was setting, and he stood partially hidden behind a large oak tree in the yard, just a few feet from the window. Were it not for the sudden feeling that she was being watched, she might not have noticed him at all. But he noticed her, watching her expertly climbing through the window while wearing a flowery knee-length sundress, both with admiration at her agility and her, well, just everything. From the ground she tugged her dress into place and smoothed her hair. She had it combed straight with a simple hair clip in the shape of a dragonfly, which pulled several locks of hair away from her face. Lucene headed toward the driveway, beckoning him with a quick nod. She climbed into Kermit, pulling her dress away from the door before slamming it closed, realizing only then that instead of getting in the passenger seat, Tanager stood politely by the side of the house. She made a laborious effort to roll down the driver's side window.
"Hop in,"
she finally called. He glanced furtively in each direction before coming toward her, making her instantly regret having spoken so loudly. Tanager looped around the front of the SUV. "Open," he instructed, staring at the door. The door didn't move. He tried again before looking quizzically at Lucene.
"Turnkey, remember?"
She smirked, leaning across the passenger seat to release the lever from inside. "Ah, yes," he recalled, pulling on the door's handle and clambering inside. "I assume hop in is just a figurative term?"
"Yes, just figurative,"
she confirmed. After a long and awkward silence, she felt the need to make small talk.
"So, since you're new around here, I don't suppose you've ever been to a new moon celebration before, have you?"
"No, this would be my very first." He wrinkled his brow, puzzled.
"You have no idea what it is, do you?"
"Not in the slightest."
"You know what the moon is, right?"
"Naturally."
"Well, a new moon is said to be symbolic of new beginnings. Thus, this one is extra special because it will become the blue harvest moon."
"Why is that special? Does your moon actually turn blue?"
"Not exactly. It sometimes gives the illusion of turning blue, and, well, a blue moon is so rare, hence the expression, once in a blue moon."
She searched his blank expression for recognition.
"Never mind,"
she continued.
"It's when there's a second full moon within a single month. On top of that, the harvest is symbolic of reaping the rewards of a person's hard work. So this celebration is where we ask for all the blessings we want related to all the goals we've set throughout the year, up until now. We start at the new moon and let it build all the way up until the moon is full."
"Fascinating. Who do you ask?"
"Well, God, the universe, your higher self on a different plane. Pretty much whatever you believe in."
"And what do you believe in, Lucene?"
"Good question."
She stared at the road uncomfortably and continued driving. "Where is this celebration taking place?"
There's an open field behind the sanctuary where I work. The minister, Reverend Isabella, will open the ceremony by having me and a couple other helpers pass out wish papers and pens for participants to write down their wishes. We then collect them for her. She'll lead a meditation where we focus on what we wrote. The papers go into the burning bowl anointed with oils. The bowl is set on fire, and Reverend Isabella uses the feathers to fan the flames up to the heavens.
"But what if a person's god of choice is an earth spirit living in the ground? How will the prayers reach them?"
"It's symbolic,"
Lucene reiterated.
"Besides, the ashes are then sprinkled over the field, so I'm sure earth spirits are included."
Tanager nodded. That answer was deemed acceptable.
"And now I have another question for you."
Lucene glanced in Tanager's direction. "Yes?"
"What's with the fedora and jacket all the time? Are you in disguise?
Apparently not. He looked down at his garb. It hadn't escaped his attention that he didn't quite mesh with his new surroundings, but hadn't quite figured out how to remedy the situation just yet.
Well, if you're trying to be less conspicuous, you would have done better to wear shorts and a t-shirt to kind of blend in.
Then I probably shouldn't confess that I'm wearing a crisp armed shirt with fancy pants under my coat.
Armed shirt with fancy pants?
Lucene laughed.
Oh, I think you mean a long-sleeve shirt and dress slacks. Aren't you hot?
Sweltering.
Tell you what, let's stop at the closet at the sanctuary before we hit the ceremony. We're early and have a few minutes to spare. We have a large assortment of clothes in varied sizes that people have donated. I'm certain we can dredge something up for you to help you fit in.
She pulled into the parking lot as Tanager deciphered dredge in the context of the conversation.
Follow me,
she instructed, leading the way to the back of the sanctuary. The closet, as it turned out, was a small, faux wood-panelled room. Two sides of it were lined with clothes racks, men's clothing one side, women's on the other. The wall closet to the door held simple shelving filled with shoes, separated by their intended gender and further segmented by size. Next to the open door, two curtains hung in concealing circles. The centre of the room, however, was not nearly so well organised. A long table sat with a variety of ties, hats, scarves, and even a few pieces of woven and metal jewellery. Tanager surveyed the room with interest. Lucene sensed his question.
It's for people who need everyday clothes or clothes for a job interview but can't afford it. How about this?
Lucene held up a Hawaiian shirt, peppered with palm trees. That seems very obvious to me, Tanager answered carefully.
Nah, people will just think you're a tourist.
Tanager's eyes suddenly lit up as he spotted a grey fishing hat with a piece of aqua ornamental bait stitched to the side. He tried it on, happily.
Oh, that's definitely you.
Reverend Isabella popped her head into the room. She was stunning, with a blue-green, multi-hued, full-length robe and beaded headdress. Lucene and Tanager looked up, somewhat startled at the interruption.
Lucene, tell me, who is your new friend?
She peered at him closely.
Or should I say old friend? Reverend Isabella.
Lucene replied quickly.
This is a friend of mine from New York. Tanager, this is Reverend Isabella. She founded the sanctuary and is the head minister.
Isabella resisted a laugh as Tanager tipped his fishing hat to her. She put out her hand, and, to Lucene's relief, Tanager shook it instead of kissing it. It's nice to meet you. She couldn't help but notice that his hat was completely out of place with the rest of his attire.
Tanager is here on business and completely forgot to pack casual wear. We thought perhaps he could borrow a couple of pieces here and, in exchange, he could donate one of his suits to the sanctuary. Given the cost of your dreads?
Isabella eyed him again.
I'd say the sanctuary is getting the better end of the deal. I'm sure it will make someone in need very happy.
I sincerely hope it does, Tanager answered. Until that moment, he hadn't considered that by swapping clothes, he might actually be helping an earthling. The thought made him smile.
It's not much.
She pointed to one of the curtains.
But you can change there. I hope you will join us for the ceremony. We'll be there.
Lucene confirmed.
I'll be out front to help in 15 minutes if that's okay with you. Perfect.
Isabella winked before she seemed to, quite literally, float out of the room. Within no time, Tanager had settled on one pair of shorts, one pair of cargo pants, two casual shirts, one sun cap, and although he really didn't need it, one fishing hat. He opted to wear the cargo pants, a Hawaiian shirt, and a salt life cap. Lucene managed to talk him out of the fishing hat, explaining that it might be out of place for this event. He kept it anyway. In exchange, he left his dress shirt, slacks, suit jacket, and trench coat folded neatly on the centre table. Is it okay if I keep the fedora? I've grown somewhat attached to it.
Of course.
Lucene smiled. She'd grown rather fond of him wearing it.
I promise that what you've left is more than enough.
Once I return home, I will ask Ivan to donate the rest of my clothing as well."
"That's very thoughtful of you."
Lucene tilted her head and smiled at him with admiration, remembering herself.
"We better get going. Why don't I drop the rest of your things in the car first?"
Lucene planned on depositing Tanager at a nearby lawn chair while she helped Reverend Isabella, but in true Tanager fashion, he had to be of service. She handed him some crinkled wish paper, which he distributed to the attendees strewn out across the field, some in chairs and others on blankets. She followed up with pencils. "Hey, I like your shirt," a man commented to Tanager, who looked down and beamed proudly at the man. "I used to have one just like it, until the missus made me get rid of it." He nodded toward his wife. Her face flushed with embarrassment as she elbowed her husband in the ribs.
"He has way too many, and I must say the suit looks better on you than it did him."
Her husband grunted. Tanager didn't put the connection together and simply tipped his cap to her as a thank you. With that, they continued their task. "Well, fancy meeting you here!" A boisterous voice came at them from behind, startling Lucene. There, Roman hovered over them, dressed in his usual all-black goth-like jeans and T-shirt. He grinned at her in a way that made her uncomfortable. What exactly did he know about her that she didn't already know about herself? "Roman, it's nice to see you again." Tanager shook his hand in earnest. Lucene found it interesting. Her tendency was to distrust until proven otherwise, whereas Tanager, on the other hand, seemed completely neutral, a blank slate until someone showed their worth or lack of it. "A fine celebration, isn't it?" Roman spewed enthusiasm. "The only thing that would make it better is if my lovely Fatima were here." Lucene searched his face for insincerity through his flowery words. She found none. Moments later, Reverend Isabella addressed the crowd. All fell silent and settled in for one of her meditations. Lucene motioned for Tanager to take a seat beside her on a blanket that was offered by a family sitting nearby. "We brought extra just in case," they smiled. Lucene instinctively sat cross-legged on the ground, resting her palms lightly in her lap, left over right, and closing her eyes. Tanager could feel her energy shift immediately. Surprising. He assumed the same pose, his left knee lightly touching her right, and the familiar energy between them was back again. Lucene opened one eye to glance at her knee, just to make sure they were actually touching. They were. After the dinner last night, she had to be sure. Tanager smiled lightly to himself. Roman knelt behind them, sitting on his heels and holding his arms out with palms raised and thumb and forefinger pressed into a mudra. Several people looked on with interest, but mostly to wonder how he planned to hold his arms up for that long, and then sank back into their own meditation. Reverend Isabella began with a protection prayer, blessing the land and all those who were on it, asking that all learn to walk gently on Mother Earth. Lucene's mind sank. Images floated up from her subconscious, along with the words experimentation and preserves. Suddenly she was back in New York, watching as the IPP summit went up in smoke. More images surfaced, flooding in faster than she could filter them out. She opened her mouth, about to let out a scream. Tanager wrapped an arm around her and touched the palm of his hand to the side of her face, pulling her toward him. Roman watched with interest, expecting him to kiss her. Instead, he did something very odd. He pressed his forehead to hers, and in a moment, she calmed down. She couldn't bring herself to open her eyes. Tanager knowingly pulled away and returned to the meditation. Sometime later, Reverend Isabella summoned people to come up in groups to drop their wish paper into the fire. Lucene took that as her cue, jumping up to help guide small groups, making sure small children didn't get too close to the flames. Roman gave her a knowing look, as he tossed his paper into the fire, except that she still didn't know what it was she was supposed to know. After the ceremony, people began to gather up their belongings and head home. Tanager was pulled away momentarily by Reverend Isabella, who asked for his assistance in gathering ceremony materials. He obliged without question. As Lucene moved to help them, Roman took her by the elbow. "Walk with me for a moment, won't you?" Confused, Lucene fell into step beside him, taking 2 paces to his single long stride. She looked up at him, questioningly. "I know you like him," he said, not looking at her.
Who?
He nodded over his shoulder.
Oh, you mean Tanager. Well, I suppose he's all right.
"Just be careful. He's not who you think he is."
What do you mean?
I think he's a traitor and is secretly working for them."
Who's them?
She asked, more confused than ever. "The royals." He stopped, nodding as if this should have meaning to her.
I literally have no idea what you're talking about.
She stared him in the eyes as if demanding meaning. Roman was taken aback. She really didn't remember. "He's dangerous." His expression turned dark. "I thought he was here to help our planet as as others who came here before us were. But I'm concerned that the stories are true."
And what stories would those be, Roman?
Lucene bristled a little at the accusation. "His only interest is in helping the royals wipe out civilization as we know it and repopulate the earth. And he needs you to do it." Chapter 20. Mr. Sparks. Monday morning at the docks, 5 years after the assembly. It took a little time for Lucene to find him. Somehow, she'd settled on the most unobtrusive boat along the docks, watching as a frazzled man climbed aboard, seemingly having a conversation with himself.
Jim Sparks?
Lucene asked. Yeah, the man answered, trying to arrange his dirty, unkempt hair without much luck. He looked around nervously, giving his unshaven chin a scratch. "Do I know you?"
I don't think so, but I'm not sure. My name is Luke.
Jim's eyes grew wide as he spotted the tree-like patterns on Lucene's uncovered arms. "Climb on board, quickly." Jim motioned for her to hurry. Lucene obeyed, even though all common sense would have told her getting into a strange man's boat was a bad idea. She'd already done a lot of uncommon sense things lately. Why should this be any different? From across the marina, a pear-shaped woman with fizzy red curly hair glared at her from her tiny houseboat, her eyes peering suspiciously over the romance novel she was reading. Jim waved at her in reassurance.
The
woman muttered, returning to her book. "Surprised to see you, Lucene. Make yourself comfortable," he offered once she was inside. Lucene looked around the boat, littered with pieces of unwashed, tattered clothing on seats, a few dishes and utensils with food still stuck to them on the dinette, and a smell worse than red tide. The man himself would have passed for homeless had she not, in fact, been standing in his home. Lucene politely lifted an unwashed T-shirt from a chair with her forefinger and thumb, gently placing it to one side, and half sat on the edge of the seat, conscious that she may need to check herself for lice after the visit. Jim leaned against the pantry door apologetically. "Sorry," he apologized. "I haven't had time to clean yet. This week. Been a bit busy." The tiny sailboat looked as if more than a week had gone by since it had received a little tender loving care. More like 52 weeks.
Mr. Sparks.
Lucene was confused.
You seem to know me. Do I know you?
Good question, he stammered. He ran his hands through his hair, then tapped his fingers together as he searched for the right words. "How should I put this?" He tapped his head. They're gonna kill you," he finally blurted out. Lucene was taken aback. Once again, she was getting a danger alert. She knew she should have been afraid of this stranger, but he gave off a similar, recognizable energy to Tanager and Cepheus, albeit much weaker and more frazzled somehow. She continued with caution.
Wait, what? Who?
Lucene searched his face for meaning. He held his head.
Who's going to kill me?
"My head hurts," he responded. Instinctively, Lucene went to him. Jim flinched slightly as Lucene touched 3 fingers to his head. For a moment, she could feel his pain and fear. "The royals," she heard him think. Jim wiped a few painful tears from his eyes, using the hem of his t-shirt. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a prescription bottle and popped a pill, chewing it up, crumpling his face at the apparent bitterness.
I'm sorry you're in pain, but you must tell me. How are the royals involved in this?
She asked, backing away. You got that, he nodded. We always knew you were special.
About the royals?
She asked again. Nasty bunch, he shook his head. They came here eons ago to repopulate Earth and other places by setting up their nurseries. Except things didn't go as planned, and now they want to kill everyone and try again.
Everybody or just me?
Lucene persisted. She knew the royals were banned from the IPP because of shady practices, but this part was new. Well, you're special. They want what you have. Gee, my head hurts. They want what you have. What I have. Had. They tried to take it from me, but I wouldn't give it to them. But you? His eyes grew wide. You're more than special. Can't let them get you. Lucene began to see images in her head. Bright lights, sounds, pain, surgeries, many surgeries. She began to scream. No, no, Jim clasped his dirty hands over her mouth. Mustn't do that. He looked around nervously. She mentally shut a red door with the sounds, sights and pain trapped behind it.
Everything okay in there?
The red-haired woman croaked, peering her head down from the top deck of the sailboat suspiciously. With no way to get from her houseboat to Jim's sailboat at such speed, it could only be assumed that she'd been listening in for some time. Yeah, Jim called to her. Thanks, Jenny. My, niece saw a roach and got scared.
No doubt about that, your place is filthy. She
coughed. What she did doubt, however, was that Lucene was his niece. You can go now, Jenny, Jim called up to her, visibly annoyed. She said again, and began shuffling toward the exit ramp. She decided that she had no interest in meeting what she presumed was the other woman, anyway.
Do you want me to know where to find me? She
called. Under her breath, she swore.
Niece my ass.
You should go, Jim told Lucene. It isn't safe. Jenny's a sweet gal with a big mouth.
Just one more thing. Do you know a fellow by the name of Roman? He's very tall with dark hair and a light complexion. He claims to be one of us,
she said carefully. Mr. Sparks shook his head fervently. Nah, never heard that name before. Not ever. I'd be careful if I was you.
Thank you, Mr. Sparks, and I hope your head feels better.
A weird calm overcame the man. Thanks, it already does. Always knew you were special.
Hang on, let me at least give you an address where you can find me. Perhaps we can meet again soon. I have a friend who I believe might be able to help you with your headaches. Nah,
he shook his head. Don't give me your address. Okay, maybe, he nodded. Yeah, no. He debated with himself for the next minute, nodding and then shaking his head.
Do you have a piece of paper by chance?
She interrupted him, looking around with uncertainty. Just think it, and I'll see if I can retrieve it.
Just think it,
She was getting used to her connection with Tanager, but hadn't considered its wider application, and she certainly wasn't trained on how to use it yet.
I'll try,
she nodded, thinking the address as hard as she could. Mr. Sparks winced a little, and then gave up with a sigh.
I'm sorry, Mr. Sparks. I'm not sure how to direct my thoughts like that.
It's okay. You'll get it back soon. He leaned in. You just whisper the address to me. I'll remember. Lucene wasn't terribly sure about that, but she obeyed.
900 Prosperous Lane, it's...
That's enough, Mr. Sparks waved his hand. I know where you are. Lucene nodded.
I'll be going now.
As she began to climb the stairs, he stopped her. Oh, yeah. You might want to watch out for mermaids and blue butterflies too, 'cause they claim to be here to help, but I'm not too sure about them. Lucene gave a confused nod and quickly made her exit. Monday afternoon. Jim Sparks was quite shaken by Lucene's visit earlier in the day. He instinctively reached for his pain medication and chewed an extra pill. He retreated to his bed, a small mattress located in a cubbyhole toward the back of the boat. As he felt the boat listlessly drifting back and forth, up and down, he remembered his homeland. So much time had passed since he left Day that he struggled with certain details. But there were some things he could remember vividly. Its lush green landscapes, unspoiled waters, and their language. He loved that their native tongue was so melodic. Neighbours from visiting planets always commented that they didn't have to speak the language in order to understand its sentiment. And if exposed to it long enough, they were able to easily speak it, even without formal training. He'd spoken next to nothing but English since he'd arrived on Earth. Jim smiled blissfully to himself as he floated off to sleep, mumbling a few blessings to himself in his old language. He didn't hear that someone had boarded the boat and was making their way toward him. In his mind, he was already elsewhere. 21. Mr. Cushing and the Mermaid. Monday afternoon at the docks, 5 years after the assembly.
You've been a bad boy, Mr. Cushing.
Drake Cushing's eyes drifted downward toward his sneakers. There, just beyond the dock where he stood, the greenish-blue torso of a woman waded in the marina, her lower half obscured beneath the water's surface. Her indigo hair was cropped short and matted against her head. Her face had natural streams of blue and grey, flowing stripes across it, making her the perfect camouflage if she had been standing in front of the northern lights. And tiny gills could be detected on each side of her neck. Everything else about her features looked perfectly human from this vantage point. And she did nothing to hide her breasts as she bobbed up and down in the water. "Odessa, how lovely to see you!" Drake flashed her his toothiest grin, the fake one he always used to imply friendliness when he didn't really mean it. He continued his walk along the dock. She swam alongside him, a splash of fins thrashing behind her. He pretended not to notice. He had an appointment to keep. Finally, Odessa grew impatient and splashed him with her tail, just enough to wet his jeans, but preserve his shirt and suit jacket. "What can I do for you this morning?" Drake scowled, stopping abruptly and wiping a water droplet from his eye.
There's a nasty rumor going around that you're double-dealing, Mr. Cushing.
Odessa smiled flirtatiously, waving her arms back and forth to keep her afloat.
My superiors don't like it.
Odessa was the reason people still believed in mermaids. She wasn't one, but looked every bit the part. In reality, she was an informant for the Vitruvians from Section 2, and was supposed to report any and all suspicious activity that might affect the well-being of her people. As with all Vitruvians, She had the ability to shift into different forms, sometimes human-like, but more often what earthlings would describe as animals. She discovered she was partial to the water and spent most of her time as close to the marina as possible, only coming up on land when her job required it. "I don't know what you've heard, but I can assure you, Odessa, my intentions are honourable." He squatted down to look her in the eyes, but not before surveying his surroundings. While it may have been becoming slightly more acceptable for species from other planets to take up residence on Earth when on special government assignment, it certainly wasn't common, and it certainly wasn't appreciated. "I'm simply fulfilling my role as chief negotiator between your people and the royals, as both parties have asked of me. Please don't interfere."
When have I ever interfered, Mr. Cushing?
Odessa pouted. Her feelings hurt.
I have no allegiance to anyone whatsoever. I'm just doing my job.
"Well, you can tell the Vitruvians that everything is going according to plan."
Morph and I might disagree with you.
"And how is our little blue butterfly these days?" Drake did nothing to hide his contempt.
That's a fine way to talk about someone who saved your life.
"You know something?" Drake ignored the comment. "Your people have a strange way of getting what they want. They won't overtly kill anyone, but if the royals decide to decimate the human population, well, that's just fine. Everyone will divide the spoils, and the Vitruvians walk away with the self-righteous illusion that they are a peaceful people." Odessa clucked at him.
And here I thought you'd understand, being American and all. We put our people first. Sure, we'll defend ourselves should the royals prove to be less than honorable. But we do our best to mind our own business.
"Like what you're doing now, you mean?" He motioned his hand wildly into the air. "Look, I prefer not to be seen in public talking to a mermaid."
I am not a mermaid,
Odessa squealed. She quickly softened her expression, however, when she saw Drake's amused expression. She had fallen right into his trap. "Odessa, it's been a pleasure," Drake lied. "But tell the Vitruvians they have nothing to worry about. The deal is going down according to plan." With that, he waved a hand in dismissal and stood. Odessa made a gesture with her face that was probably derogatory on her planet, but one that was completely lost on him. She did a few backstrokes before disappearing beneath the water. Drake pulled a handkerchief from the back pocket of his jeans and wiped his brow. It was getting easier with each attempt, but he still found this whole business nerve-wracking. After a few cursory glances around him, he made his way just past a tiny white houseboat in the marina. He took a seat on a nearby bench as planned, and pulled out his cell phone to send a simple text. "I'm here." Moments later, Mr. Sparks' Ginny showed up, disguised with a scarf around her head and thick sunglasses. Her frizzled red hair poked out from under the scarf. "Hey, Ginny!" A neighbouring boater waved as she walked by. She began to wave back before remembering that she was supposed to be in disguise. Ginny quickly ducked her head, grabbing her scarf with both hands under her chin and tugging it tightly. Drake watched with a curious expression as she walked past the bench where he sat, looked over her shoulder, and kept going. She made it to a lamppost several feet away before she turned and shuffled back over to him.
You Cushing?
She whispered gruffly. "I am," Drake flashed her a grin. "You must be the lovely Ginny." She let out a hoarse laugh, followed by a cough. She sat down next to Drake, who instinctively slid away from her as he caught a whiff of heavy cigarette smoke. His eyes began to water slightly before he once again made use of his handkerchief.
"Now you promise me Jim's gonna be okay, right?"
"Of course, Ginny. I'm so glad you phoned me. The family has been worried sick."
"I kinda had a feeling it might be something like this."
She shook her head.
"Poor Jim. He's a sweet man, but a little touched in the head. Well, sorry, I didn't mean to say that."
It's quite all right, Drake reassured her. Mental illness can be so unpredictable. He up and disappeared one day, and if it weren't for you, we wouldn't have found him. Now, which boat is his? Ginny cleared her throat awkwardly. Drake nodded, understanding. Of course. He pulled a folded cashier's check from his shirt pocket. $3,000 as a finder's fee and our family's gratitude. Ginny's eyes lit up like a dog spotting a squirrel. She took it gingerly, trying not to appear too eager.
I wouldn't even ask for this, it's just that I can really use the money right now.
I completely understand.
And he'll be okay.
I assure you, Ginny, Jim is going to get the best care from the top doctors. When he does, I have no doubt he'll be back to visit you. I hear he's a little sweet on you, Drake teased, nudging her arm.
Oh, go on.
Ginny's cheeks turned red. She tucked the check in her bra strap under her blouse.
Not too sure about that. He had some young thing stop by earlier.
Her eyes lit up.
He claimed to be his niece, but that can't be right, can it? Seeing how his family is still looking for him.
That's curious, Drake agreed, trying to suppress his own curiosity. Did you happen to meet this niece?
Nah, he tried to keep me away. Probably some floozy.
Could you describe her for me?
Well...
Ginny tapped the cashier's check subconsciously. Drake took the hint. I don't have much, he informed her, reaching for his wallet. But I could give you an additional 100 cash for your troubles. He pulled out a crisp bill.
Aw.
Ginny snatched the bill from his fingertips and tucked it behind the other unoccupied bra strap.
I wouldn't ask, except, I'm a little light on cash these days.
Times are hard all around, Drake frowned sympathetically. I'm grateful for your help.
Well, her hair was kind of short and brown.
She thought for a moment. Yes?
Couldn't see her eyes, but she had a normal-ish shaped face.
Yes? Drake grew impatient.
Wore jeans, a green t-shirt, nothing unusual about that.
Anything else? Drake clenched his teeth.
Oh, there was one thing.
Her eyes suddenly lit up. Yes?
She had these weird tattoos on her arms, looked like tree branches.
Drake's surprised micro-expression was lost on Ginny. He quickly recovered. You didn't happen to catch her name by chance, did you?
It was hard to get in with Jim stuttering, but it sounded like Lucy.
You've been very helpful, Ginny, thank you. Drake stood. If you remember anything else, you know how to reach me. I promise to pay you for your efforts. Suddenly, her eyes lit up.
Oh, I remember. She lives off Prosperous Lane.
Ginny hugged herself proudly and leaned back on the bench.
They didn't think I could hear, but I have ears as sharp as owls. Who do you think she was?
No idea, Drake answered, but I will certainly report it to the family. Could be a drug dealer, who knows?
Probably that.
Ginny furrowed her lips. Now where can I find Mr. Sparks?
It's the tattered white sailboat over there next to my houseboat. Mine's the one with the yellow flower pot on the deck.
Thank you, Ginny, he answered, watching as she struggled to stand. To avoid Jim getting embarrassed, would you mind keeping our talk to yourself?
Nobody will hear a peep out of me, I swear,
Ginny promised, eyes wide. Well, that's just fine. Good day, Ginny.